Thank you, everyone, for waiting. I appreciate it. Some real personal things happening, and I appreciate you all waiting because I didn't want to put you on this delay. But we'll move forward. First of all, I guess, thank you for being here. And first, I think we go to approval for minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Minutes have been approved. So I'm going to just go forward with you going forward with your presentation. Thank you. I think we're looking at one of the things I know that we have always had the public that doesn't always listen to our meetings or doesn't always come to our meetings or come to our meetings and don't always listen to our meetings while they're here. We have a very transparent budget. And I thought, and as we have gone forward, we know today we're going to look at some of the things that shows all the things that we have done to make us as transparent as possible in our budget. Okay, thank you, Mr. Nieder.
Great. Thank you, and good afternoon, Finance Chair Cash, members of the board, and Superintendent Moore. And if I could ask for the slide deck to be brought up on the displays. And if we could advance to the next slide, please. So today we're going to give you an overview of systems, structures, and processes that we've established, as well as financial reporting that we do within the district in our efforts to maintain fiscal accountability and transparency of the district's finances. Included in our review will be some of the fiscal reports that are provided to the board on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. And when these board reports do come to the board, they are included within Assembly on our website for anyone to access and view the complete reports. And further, the two large annual reports that are brought before the board, one being the annual operating budget, kind of what our plan is, and the second being the annual comprehensive financial report, what actually happened. They're presented to the board at work sessions, finance committee meetings, and also brought to board meetings. And those financial reports as well are loaded into Assembly, and the two annual reports are also loaded on our main website along with history, and you'll see more about that in a few slides. You'll also hear today about the annual financial audit that is conducted by an independent CPA firm reviewing the district's financial reporting, internal controls, and other related matters. And you'll hear about the independent audit committee made up of public accountants, business people, and attorneys. These are community members, not Wake County staff, that are members of this board that are nominated by the Board of Education. And it's this independent audit committee that is charged with making recommendations to the board for selection of audit firms, external audit firms. And it's also the same committee that's charged with reviewing the results of the annual financial audit and bringing that directly to the board as opposed to coming from staff. And you'll hear about established business practices that are in place to ensure we're paying competitive prices for the things we purchase, that we have separation of duties in place to ensure internal control, and staffing structures focused on fiscal accountability and transparency. I want to now spend a couple slides just on context. The district has an operating budget just over $2 billion annually. And as our core business is the teaching and learning of the district's 160,000 students, It's a line that the supermajority of the district's operating budget is spent directly at the schools to fund teachers, instructional support staff, front office staff, coaches, and others. That represents 89% of the operating budget going directly to the schools. And school would not happen without the additional 4% that's reported in the facilities and operations segment, because that 4% goes for the utilities that light, cool, and heat our schools, custodians and maintenance and operations that keep our schools clean and repair them as needed, child nutrition operations that run the cafeterias in the schools, and the transportation department, which provides transportation to our students to and from school. So effectively, that's 93% of the operating budget going directly to the schools. There's 2% of the budget that passes through directly to charter schools that we have no control over and we cannot use. And the remaining 5% of the operating budget supports our central service operations at the bottom of the pyramid, supporting our school structure. Again, staying with a little context, pre-K through grade 12 and then really onto early college is a human resource intensive business, and over 80% of our operating budget goes directly to pay for staff salaries and related benefits. And to give you a sense of the size of the district, and I believe one of our board members has used this as an example, and I think it's a good example, if we wanted to add just one teacher at each of our schools, just one teacher, that district-wide would require an investment of additional $14.6 million. One teacher. Two teachers, $29.2 million. Three teachers, you can keep doing the math. It's linear. Next, I want to jump into who decides how we can invest our funding. So we received that $2.1 billion of funding, and we just decide how we want to spend it, right? Wrong. Wake County Schools has provided strict guidance by the federal government, the state government, and other regulating agencies as to specifically how the funding can be spent. There is some latitude, but the majority of it is directly specified to us. And then moving on from who decides what we spend to who decides how we account for our finances, again, we're strictly guided as to how our operating budget can be spent and how we must account for the expenditures. Every account in our chart of accounts, which is where as we expend money, it's accounted for, has a fund code, a purpose code, a program code, an object code, a level code, and a cost center. And that's standardized across the state, and it's based on both what the state requires, including state legislation, what federal requirements there are associated with federal funding that we receive, and a lot of other things. The fund code specifies where the funding comes from. Is it local funding? Is it federal funding? Is it grant, non-federal aided? The object code specifies what the expenditure is. Are we buying supplies? Did it go to salaries or benefits, or the payroll taxes associated with that? And then the cost center specifies where in the district the funds are being spent. Each school has its own cost center. So funds spent at the school are going to accounts with that cost center. And each of our central services departments has a cost center, and some actually have more than one cost center. So, and there are a few other things I'm not going to go into given the time as far as the other parts of the code, but our chart of accounts where we have to place expenditures has over 300,000 accounts to account for our almost 200 schools and all the accounts they must maintain, as well as our central service departments. And the last thing I want to touch on before turning it over to Senior Director of Budget Terry Kimsey, I want to speak to as far as ensuring fiscal accountability is tone at the top. Experts consistently state one of the keys for an organization to maintain fiscal integrity is to set the appropriate tone at the top. In our case, the tone at the top comes from the superintendent, her leadership team, our school principals, and our central services department heads for ensuring we all are all doing the right things, following the rules, making decisions appropriately and within policy. And I'll share the example I share here on this slide is an annual letter that comes from the superintendent, went out just this past week actually. It goes to all employees and it reminds them about the appropriate use of district resources and where to turn if something is happening that should not be happening. One of those places for an employee to turn is an anonymous tip hotline where staff can report allegations of fraud or misuse, fiscal misuse. And again, experts consistently state that anonymous hotlines are the #1 way that fiscal misdoing is discovered. So again, just another example of both tone at the top as well as a vehicle for having misdoings reported. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Kimsey, who's going to take us through financial reporting, and after that, our finance officer, Mark Winters, will continue the presentation.
Good afternoon. One of the areas of financial reporting is our net savings identified in the local budget. Budgeting is a dynamic process. The operating budget changes daily depending on the spending plans of our schools and our departments. It also fluctuates based on changes in grants, contracts, allotments, and other revenues. There can be significant changes during the year in some areas. And when we report these changes, it's the material differences. There could be legislated salary and benefits different than those that were estimated when the budget was prepared. The actual student membership for our students and for charter schools will come in different than projections. Utility costs fluctuate during the year, either due to rate adjustments occur or weather patterns. Transportation, fuel, and repair costs and services for students vary. There could be one-time savings or costs that happen during the year in our departments. We align staff across funding sources based on experience levels, and that changes during the year as we have turnover in staff. And salary and benefit adjustments occur due to changes in our vacancy rates and where those vacancies occur. We have a specific account code where we transfer any material savings that are identified during the year. That account lets us set those dollars aside in an account that cannot be spent against. Funds are transferred out of this account into the appropriate budget line items if costs occur during the year that are material and were not anticipated when the budget was prepared. Any savings transferred into that account or out of that account are reported to the Board of Education each quarter. It's called net savings identified in the local budget. That document's available in Assembly for anyone in the public to see. This provides transparency to everyone in the school system, as well as to the Board of Education and county commissioners. The process is not required by law. It's something we choose to do to make sure that everybody is informed when there are changes that occur during the year. It's a way to clearly communicate significant changes where actual costs compared to estimates are different. Subsequent slides are also going to show changes or ways that we report information. All of these documents are available for the public to see on our website. The next financial reporting item is budget transfers and amendments. This one is required by state law. So in accordance with state law, changes to the overall budget are reported to the Board of Education every month. The budget amendments and transfers summary tells why the budget's changing. Some reasons the budget changes every month are state allotment revisions from the Department of Public Instruction, grant awards or revisions that occur during the year, changes in our fee-driven programs, changes in revenue collections compared to budget, and transfers between account codes. This monthly reporting documents and communicates in a transparent manner the overall changes in the budget by fund and by purpose and function. The Local Government Commission also requires a quarterly reporting. It's called a quarterly budget status report. This is really a financial status, almost like a financial report for that quarter. It shows how our spending is occurring compared to budget. So it's really just a point in time, what are expenditures compared to budget for that period. The quarterly budget status report is available for you and the public assembly to view. There's a finance page on the website for the school system, and it provides financial data for the public. Each version of the school system's budget is posted for the public to see. It will begin with the superintendent's proposed budget, then it becomes the Board of Education's proposed budget, and then completes with the board's adopted budget. All of these are posted online for staff and the public to see, and all questions and responses from any work sessions are also provided. The finance page also includes the audited annual comprehensive financial report, summary of pandemic relief funds, and federal ESSER grants for COVID-19. Our website also provides salary schedules under the benefits page. This next slide is just a screenshot of the finances page, and for those items that I described, two of them, the adopted budget and the annual comprehensive financial report, are provided for 15 years of history. All of that's available for the public to see. Public reporting of finances is not limited to our website for the school system. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction provides public access to the North Carolina School Report Card, statistical profile information, and statewide COVID financial information. The North Carolina School Report Card includes student performance and academic growth, school and student characteristics, and many other details. And the statistical profile provides data on public school pupils, personnel, and finances. And there's a lot of history on their website also. It goes back years and years. And there are links in these slides to go to those sites.
So I'm going to take over now and talk a little bit more about fiscal accountability. So purchasing seeks competition for supplies to provide the best value of services and products. And we have a scale here of the different quote or bid processes. Below 2,500 usually stays within the department or the school, and they receive quotes. 3 quotes are required, up to 5,000. Above 5,000, purchasing takes over. It is considered the formal range. And above 90,000, we have formal solicitation by purchasing. And just as an example, purchasing last fiscal year performed 582 bids, 385 informal, 197 formal. And on the informal, when usually a vendor is selected and requested for purchasing, purchasing puts it out for a bid and saved over $200,000 in savings just on the informal bids. The other advantage of using purchasing is they have the expertise in writing the bid when working with a requester. We ask that people include purchasing when they're writing their bid. And I think a good example, since we're talking about financial matters, would be an external auditor. We would not want an individual to come in and audit us because one person could not handle our school system. We would not want someone who audits major corporations and have never audited K-12 school systems, and realistically North Carolina K-12 school systems, because of the requirements. So we can write the bid specifications to meet those kinds of items in a bid request, so we make sure we get the proper companies bidding. Next slide. We also have the ability to use the Department of Administration state contracts. We have, there's really an unrestricted requirement when we use these contracts because the state of North Carolina has already gone through the bid process. So a good example is copiers. We have multiple copy vendors that are on the state process. So a school, without going through a bid process, without requiring purchasing to, and as you can imagine, we have quite a few copiers in the school system. A school does not have to go through this bid process. We can just use a state contract. We also can use cooperative purchasing contracts. I mean, usually those are formal. That's all right. My phone was ringing, and I thought it was mine doing that, so I'm sitting here buzzing. Yeah. So the cooperative purchasing contracts, and a good example is that for office supplies, like we have an Omnia cooperative purchasing agreement that we can use for officing supplies. All solicitations are posted on the North Carolina Interactive Purchasing System, which means it's available to all vendors who can go out on the state purchasing site and see our bids. And again, we take the best responsive and responsible bid. Next slide. So we have a set of positions called independent, well, they're called fiscal administrators, and they're independent of departments. These fiscal administrators support the separation of duties within this school system. They're embedded in a department, such as academics. You will have a fiscal administrator, but they report directly to finance. So they are there to monitor the financial and budgetary transactions for compliance. They review all contracts that flow through those areas. Although they report to finance, they're a vital resource to the departments because the departments can use them to make sure the expertise in finance is taking care and protecting the school system funding. We think this is a proactive effort. Instead of making us react to something that may have happened with school system funding, this is proactive. So we get them in up front so we can help control the financial situations. We're extremely documented for processes within our financial area. We even have a 100 and some page finance manual that's online. And the people in finance think it's great, and we really do pay attention to those rules, but it helps having these fiscal administrators so they can help guide other departments in the things they do. Next slide. So we also have a practice of contract routing. We do over 2,000 contracts a year in Wake County Public Schools. Some of them are large contracts, such as you see coming from the building program. Something may be as simple as just some staff development at a school. So we route the contracts electronically, and this includes a review. Every contract will have a review by the budget manager, a fiscal administrator, risk management, and the finance officer. And depending on the dollar amount, it goes up to a leadership team member or a chief. All contracts are stored in one online folder. This gives multiple reviews for compliance and value of the service. And we also include a purchase order when routing the contract. And the reason we do that is as the contract flows through the system, we know that funding is available. We cannot write a purchase order without having available funds. So we attach that purchase order, and it guarantees that funding is available as that contract is routing. Next slide. So we'll speak a minute about internal audit. We have an internal audit department, and this audit department audits schools on a rotating schedule or by request. They audit departments as part of a risk assessment plan. The internal audit department will send out a questionnaire, and depending on the answers, they then plug this into a risk assessment plan and determine what departments are at higher risk than others for funding. And so they have a structured plan that they work on an annual basis. They work with our external auditors. Our external auditors, when they arrive, they go to a certain number of schools to audit those individual schools. And they also look at the audits from our internal auditors. So they have a larger sample when they're looking at our individual schools. As Mr. Nieder mentioned, they monitor the anonymous fraud hotline along with HR's employee relations. So we work closely in finance with the internal auditors. However, they do not report to finance. If they reported to finance, you would lose an independence on what they do. So they actually report to the superintendent and the Board of Education. So although they work closely with us, they do not report to us, which we feel is very important. And as I talk to school systems across the state, most of their internal audit departments are within the finance department, and they often do training. So if you think about that, you can't have a lot of independence when you train someone how to do a transaction and then you audit that transaction. You're basically auditing yourself. So I think our structure works much better as having them independent. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about the external audit. So an external audit is required for public school systems by General Statute 115C 447. Every 3 years, we release a RFP for audit services. We review the experience and pricing to determine a recommendation. We do present it to the Audit Committee and to the Board of Education, and our practice is to rotate the audit firm excuse me, every 6 years. It's no policy. It's just been our practice. And the contract with the audit firm is reviewed and approved by the local government commission. Next slide. So we mentioned, we're going to jump around just a second. We mentioned the Independent Audit Committee on a previous slide, and Mr. Nieder mentioned that too. And the Independent Audit Committee is described in Board Policy 8810. And the members of the committee are from the community. They're not employed by the district. They include CPAs, financial advisors, and attorneys, so all of them from the business side of the world. And to my knowledge, I've said this often when I do the presentation of the financials, I do not know of any other school system in North Carolina that has an independent audit committee. They have finance committees, but not an independent audit committee made up of the community. Next slide. So the audit committee provides guidance on the audit selection. So staff will bring a recommendation along with all the bids to the independent audit committee for their review. And the audit committee will review and either take the recommendation or suggest another recommendation, and then it is taken to the Board of Education after the audit committee makes a final decision. They also, another duty of the audit committee is to review the annual financial report with the external auditors, and at that time, they can ask questions of the auditors, and we have staff in the room to also answer questions. They present the audit committee to the review to the Board of Education as a joint presentation with the auditors and the finance department. If we have findings, they will review the findings. So I think it's important to note again that this is an independent review, no employees, knowledgeable audit committee members from the public that are looking at our financials. And I think that's important to note that they're doing something that it is not just an internal review of our departments and of the Board of Education. Next slide. So back on the external audit. So it includes a review of all the funding sources, budgets, and expenditures. The report must conform to GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, and also the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. We also have a single audit performed of the federal programs, which is both financial and looking at compliance. It includes a report of state and federal findings and question calls. So I'm going to do something that I may regret. I'm very superstitious. So when I say this, we've had no findings in 10 years. And our last finding was about separation of duties at schools, and that was with receipt of cash and deposit of cash, because we had one person doing that at the schools. So we've set up procedures. Of course, you couldn't afford to hire another person at every school just to deal with those transactions. So we did set up procedures at that time, so we have other people participating. So Board of Education, the Board of Education, and the county commissioners, and then we submit the report to the Government Finance Officers Association and the Association of School Business Officials for review also. Next slide. So other audits that happen in Wake County Public Schools. We have the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office, the Office of State Budget and Management, North Carolina DPI Monitoring and Compliance Section, the Office of the State Auditor, and then federal program audits. I mean, we have, usually in a normal year, we may have 1 or 2 audits coming for federal programs. The number of audits have increased with the pandemic funding. Right now, we're required to do a quarterly reporting that we turn in on expenditures related to the federal funding, and then we're having 1 or more audits per quarter coming from any of the names above, the compliance section, the Office of State Budget Management, or the pandemic recovery. So we're involved in multiple audits each year. And I think I will turn it back over to David now.
Okay. Thank you, Terry and Mark. I'll pull the presentation together now by sharing just a few more system structures and processes we have in place to ensure fiscal accountability. And one example of an internal control, and you've already heard Mark speak to it, is called separation of duties, and I'll share an example with the board of that. Let's say we have approved, or the board has approved in its budget, a new position, a new employee that doesn't currently exist. Before that employee can be added to our financial system and be paid, a position must be established within our Oracle ERP, and that position is created by the budget department. And the budget department only creates it if they can identify there is funding to support that position. It's only after that position is set up by budget can an actual employee be added to the system. And it's the human resource department that actually adds the employee, their information, their social security number, their number of dependents, and their hourly rate or annual salary. That's coming from human resources that report up through different channels. After that, human resources doesn't pay the individual. The individual is actually paid through a third department, compensation services, that reports up again in a different direction. Compensation services can't change the rate of pay, can't add an employee, can't take out an employee. So you've got a tri-level set of separation of duties to ensure, and it's happened in other organizations, fictitious employees are created on the payroll with fictitious social security numbers or social security numbers of people that have deceased. They're added to the payroll, they're paid, and that check is deposited in a fraudster's account. And I've seen it time and time again in the private sector. These separation of duties prevent something like that from happening. Some additional internal controls and really separation of duties. We do something called budget manager training. Anyone who can make financial decisions and approve expenditures must go through this training and pass a certification test. And occasionally, if we have some concern about whether an individual with the budget manager authority is following the rules correctly, we can either rescind their budget manager authority or we can have them go back through the training a second time. There's separation of duty on receipt of goods and services. And then I'll ask us to go to the next slide. And this is a monthly report, newsletter, if you will, that goes out. It's called Focus on Finance. This goes out to all the budget managers, those who have authority to make decisions, all school administrators, and people within our central services departments, including our non-fiscal departments. And it provides a myriad of information to them, trainings that are available, reminders about due dates as we go through the year, many things, any changes in our procedures, any changes that are being pushed down to us, either from the federal government or the state government. this is a vehicle that we can communicate all that to. And these are all kept on our Wait Connect site for employees to reference back to. And last slide I want to share with you, is some recognition that we've received on our financial reporting from third parties. We regularly receive the first two awards, the GFOA Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting and also the ASBO Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting. Those are coming from two independent agencies at the national level, recognizing the expertise and the quality of our annual financial report. Not all districts receive these. So I hope we've been able to give you a high-level overview of some of the controls that we've got in place, some of the system structures and processes that we have established, and perhaps most importantly, the financial reporting that is performed and fully available and transparent for not only the board, staff at all levels, and anyone in the public who wants to access it. It's readily available. And with that, I will thank you for your time and be glad to take, if there's any remaining time, take any questions.
All right, thank you for that. Do we have questions from the board? Yeah, Ms. Mahaffey.
Well, I think I have one quick question and then one statement. Are we allowed to go into debt?
Oh, good question.
Well, from a budget, not debt, but from a budget perspective, we're not allowed to overspend our budget. So we
Right.
do have controls, budgetary controls, so that accounts cannot be overspent.
Okay.
We are, well, are we allowed to take on debt? As a general rule, I would say no, because we don't have any revenue authority. We are not a taxing authority. The board is not a taxing authority body. That said, and this is based on governmental accounting standards boards, we enter into a lease, a multi-year lease, let's say for a copier system, that is considered debt.
I mean, like in the broad budget.
But in the broad budget, to enter into debt, like to build a building,
Right.
or to, no.
No.
Or to
I-
buy vehicles or anything like that, no.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you, all of you, and thank you, Ms. Cash, for bringing that. I think this was a lot of information that the 9 of us at this table were aware of, but making sure the public knows all the work that you all do in order to maintain not just good sound fiscal management, but transparency so folks know what's going on is important. And one of the things that I've recently shared with everyone here is one of our alumni who's taking a public finance class, writing and praising the transparency of our budget and all of the work that you do to make sure that that's available to the public. And so it's not just something that we notice, but it's something that is helping, folks in the community and hopefully someone getting a pretty good grade on their paper there. So thank you.
Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you. And I appreciate everybody on staff bringing this and helping to explain this. It's crazy because, as you go out in the district and you talk to people, you'll get people that demand, well, we need an audit. Why don't you audit? And so we've learned about our internal audit. We've learned about our external audit. And by my count, at least 5 other sources of independent audits. But the one that was really, that I'd love to know more about was the independent review that you said. Again, we're probably one of the only districts that has this independent review commission, the Citizens Commission. When did that start? And sort of what's the story on how that got started?
I'll take a first stab at that, and then Mark, please feel free to add. That was approximately 2006. And that was just when I came into the district, and not to speak about me, but I was brought into the district as a non-educator and a seasoned business person with an operations and business management and financial management background at the time, where the district was putting in place some significant improvements. Actually, it started probably a year or two before then, to internal controls, fiscal transparency, and overall fiscal management. So that's why my position was created. About the same time this policy was established, I believe 8810, and then this group was put together. The initial group was formed, and obviously these independent community members, again with financial management backgrounds or CPAs, got currently a fiscal financial advisor that makes up the membership of the committee, and an attorney. They rotate, but they've been strong, independent force for the board since 2006.
Oddly enough, it was a little bit of a takeoff on Sarbanes-Oxley when they had all those issues in the 2000s, and they required more controls, and we found some similar type things and tied it into Sarbanes-Oxley and started looking at how we could use that in a public setting, and the timing, as David said.
Thank you. And then just one last question, if I could. So, and I don't know if this is a finance question or if it's more appropriately like an HR question, and if so, we can take it up next when HR is before us. But in terms of salaries, you know, we've talked about, you said 80% of the budget are salaries and classroom expenses. When we look at salaries district-wide, we've talked about this in developing our last budget, salaries for like our maintenance operations staff and others. What sort of work goes into evaluation and comparison of the salaries we offer versus salaries either in other school districts or in other industries or agencies locally?
I'll go ahead and take a crack at that, and then AJ, if you want to come up and add as well. We do compare ourselves to other districts, both in-state and out-of-state, for competitiveness, and obviously we can't control the state portion of state employee salaries, but we certainly have the opportunity to influence the overall compensation with any local supplements. We have looked at informally and formally non-school system information, because a lot of our non-education focused staff, such as the people up here, are doing similar things in the private sector, in the for-profit sector. We have not done a formal study on market competitiveness of our compensation in a number of years. And Dr. Mutillo was speaking with me, I think, within the last week or maybe 2 weeks about it's probably time now that the pandemic is under control, maybe an endemic at this point, to do just that, so we can again get a sense. And as everyone knows, the pandemic has disrupted the overall employment marketplace big time, and perhaps into perpetuity, who knows. So that's another reason the timing is very important, as well as the board's desire and initiative, as well as staff's, to increase our competitiveness.
That sounds like that was a good endorsement of your answer right there, Mr. Nieder. So I really appreciate that. You know, one of the things we do see as we talk to people is, you know, the reality is that we do have vacancies, you know, throughout the district in different positions, not just even in the schools, but in our district office and functions. And as we talk to employees, sometimes former employees, it's not that they're leaving for other school districts that I find most often they're leaving education to find similar work or work that they can do with their professional background, but that just pays more in other fields. And so I think, you know, should you all decide to do that market competition study, that would be something I know I'd endorse. So thank you.
Yes. Okay, Ms. Scott and then Ms. Kushner.
Sorry, okay. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think this might be one of the best presentations that I've seen in my 4 years on the board, not to take away from any of your other presentations or other departments, but in terms of laying it all out there, I'm so thankful for that, because I mean, that's always one of my core goals as a board member, is to show how we're being good stewards of tax dollars. And when we are doing that, we're educating our students and supporting them in the most efficient way. And education is, of course, I think one of the most important investments that we can make as a society. I was curious about, in 2011, there was an independent audit done of just the Wake County school system as an operating system. And the findings of that, this was paid for by a grant, this was not paid for by the school system, but the findings of that were that we were operating pretty slim. And just trying to compare the first couple of pages of our operating budget from now to 2011, to me, as someone who's not a financial expert, but it looks still to be very similar on how we're investing in our system. And I was just curious if that's accurate, or if that's not a fair comparison.
No, I think it's a fair comparison, Ms. Scott, and that, if we're talking about the same audit, and I believe we are, that audit was paid for by a third party and done by an independent group. It was actually an organizational audit and a study specifically focused on our central services operations, not so much the schools and the staffing there, but to evaluate the central services operation and determine, did we have adequate staffing? Not enough staffing? We were overstaffed. We didn't need as many central services staff. And the takeaway from that was, across the board, we are very leanly staffed as a central services operation supporting our schools. And if anything, they said in many categories, we were too lean. And fast forward perhaps to modern day, I would say if a similar audit were conducted, it would find similar results. I'll share an example of Dr. Matillo's team. We took a look, and before the budget that has just been approved by the board, which does add, I think, a handful of additional central services, human resource department positions, the months of employment in the human resource department prior to that, so June 30 of this year, were the same as they were in 2007, when we had about 130-some schools and probably a similar number or a slightly higher number, 1,000 students. More employees, more workload. So does that help provide?
It does, and thank you for that context of it being more focused on central services. And again, I thank you for this. It's very easy for someone to pick and choose things in bad faith to try to paint a picture that simply is not true. And I would encourage anyone who is picking and choosing in bad faith to take a really good look at this presentation to show that we are absolutely committed to using these tax dollars to serve our students in the most efficient way possible, and doing so in a way that is abundantly crystal clear and transparent for them to see. So thank you again for the work that you do.
Thank you, Ms. Cash, and thank you for the presentation. I echo Ms. Scott's comments. I think it's been maddening to hear a lot of false narratives out in the community around our budget and around our finances and around, given that I know how crystal clear we are in publicly having our budget online, working with our county partners on our budget, reporting every dollar, every penny to the county for their local dollars, the same with the state. We have, as you know, has been already summarized, external audits, independent internal auditing. We are excellent stewards of our tax dollars. I know everyone on this board takes that responsibility very seriously, because we want every penny to be going to our children's education. And I think that anyone seeking to be on a school board should have that as their goal. And I think they need to have this clear information about our low overhead, about the dedication of our staff, sometimes putting on 2 or 3 hats to do this work. And I think having this 15 years of clear public documents, the fact that we never run a deficit because that is illegal, so we don't do that. We never run a deficit. We pinch every penny. The unaccountable part of our budget is the part going to charter schools, as far as I'm concerned. That 2% is unaccountable. We can't do anything but pass that through. So I suggest that anyone looking for some lack of accountability should look to the charter school board and ask for their accountability standards, which I do not think are as rigorous as ours. And we have a bigger budget, and we have a lower overhead. And it clearly makes me angry when these false narratives start permeating in our community, and I have to answer questions from constituents that are clearly getting misinformation from people talking about our school system. Given the entire hard work that our staff has been doing and accounting for every penny of $2 billion, that's not easy to do, and y'all do it. So thank you. And my question would be, does that, no, I'm not going to ask you if it pisses you off too. The fact that this external audit committee, Mr. Winters, that I've had since I've been on the board, is that a practice that we share with other LEAs? Because I think that would be an excellent system to implement with other schools that receive public dollars.
So yes, I have talked to other LEA finance officers about what we do, but I still do not know of any that have one at this time.
I think that would be something we could promote to DPI as an idea for them to make sure that our public school systems have sound financial practices throughout the state. Thank you.
Any other board members? So first of all, I want to kind of do a summary here. Thank you so much. This was a very important presentation. I think all the board members that have spoken and those that I know feel the same have expressed the board's philosophy really well on transparency. So we have a $2.1 billion operating budget coming to us from multiple funding sources, from federal, state, local grants, all kinds of different areas. And we are the only system that has an independent external audit of extremely qualified people that I have had the opportunity to work with, and it's part of our board policy. So I think that, in summary, we, as the Wake County Public School System, have one of the most transparent budgets available out there. And so as finance chair for some time now, I would like to say that the Wake County Public School System is transparent, and if there is any rhetoric out there, to me it means a couple of things. I think, number one, you may have not done your homework. You can review all the documents online. They're very prevalent, very available. To me, any successful leader in Wake County at this point must do their homework to make good decisions as we move forward. So any rhetoric that says we do not have a transparent budget is simply someone that has not done their homework well. You may not understand how to read a budget of this size, which I would understand, but I think, again, we have welcomed questions everywhere possible, and we are totally available to help you interpret any document that we have out there, and we welcome to do that. So I think what I wanted to hear today, that our finance committee and David Nieder and your people, Mark Winters and Terry Kimsey, they've been here long, well, I mean, having worked with all of you guys for so long means so much to me. It means that I can totally trust what you say, and I have seen the character that you bring to Wake County Public School systems and know it well. So I thank you for that, and I appreciate the presentation today. I hope that anybody in our community that has not looked at this presentation today or has not reached out to us for questions will do so as we move forward. So thank you for that. And just, is there any more follow-up? Okay, so again, thank you again. Great finance meeting and a great way to kind of round this up. And hopefully we'll hear from the community if they have questions. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.